All right, starting a little bit late today, but I'm going to be making brown bear and black bear meringues. And these are going to be part of a woodland animal camping meringue set that I'm making for my local farmer's market this Saturday. So today I'm making the bears. Tomorrow I will make foxes and deer. And Thursday I'm going to make trees and campfires. So maybe not quite as exciting, but I'll show you some really simple techniques to make those. I thought a lot of people go camping on Memorial Day weekend, which is this upcoming weekend, I think. I hope. And what better way than to make some little camping themed animals? And the first time I made these, I actually made them to decorate a cake. And it was a 3-layer cake that I painted buttercream mountains and trees onto around the sides. And so they were kind of bluish purple mountains, a little bit gray, some evergreen trees. And then on top I decorated it with these little guys, the deer meringues, the fox meringues, all around a meringue campfire. And I built a little tent out of graham crackers that I cut really small, and I rolled out some white fondant and kind of made a tent out of it. And then I put the little meringue trees around kind of the outside of the cake, kind of lining half of it. And it made a really cute little camping scene. That was probably one of my favorite projects. I'd like to do a lot more like that, where I make little theme cakes and meringues to go along with them. And these bears are probably one of my favorite designs, especially because I'll be doing alternating brown bears and black bears. I just think they look really cute together. But also because they are fairly easy to pipe, easy on my hands because they're just such basic shapes. And because I think things like teddy bears and gummy bears are really cute, and that's kind of how I try to make these little guys. The arm got away from him a little bit, but that's easy to fix. Oopsie. Maybe not so easy. Took me a minute. That arm is not quite behaving. Kind of looks like it's blending into the head. Maybe if I just... Nope, I'm making it worse. Gonna leave him. That's okay, because you know what? That's a sample quality. I always like bringing samples to the market so people can try meringues if they've never really tried them before. I think a lot of people, even if they don't think they've tried meringues, have tried them in some form before. I always compare it to the little marshmallow bits in Lucky Charms, because those are essentially meringues. But when people try them as samples, they're much more likely to be like, oh, I like that. Not only is it cute, but it's got like this freeze-dried candy texture, vanilla flavor that's really tasty. And kids love them. They pick the cutest little samples and then they bite their faces right off. They have no hesitation. It's so funny. The adults will be like, no, I don't know how I could ever eat it. And the kids just go straight for the jugular. My favorite feedback from customers is always to do with their kids. Like, sometimes they'll get tubs and then they'll send one meringue in their kids' school lunch as a little treat. A little surprise in their lunch box. I always think that's really cute. Alright, I'm going to give these guys little tails. Awesome. And then I'll move on to the next row, which will be black bears. So I like to blob a little sphere kind of situation down. And then right on top of that, another maybe slightly smaller sphere, but sometimes it turns out about exactly the same size. So sometimes I kind of play around with the sizes of them. Bears can come in all shapes and sizes. We think they're all cute. That one had a bit of a bigger base and a smaller head. There we go. And then I'm going to use the brown that I used for the body of the brown bears for the snout of the black bears. And that is really just a little circle. I kind of put even pressure and wiggle the tip back and forth to make a smooth muzzle. And then let's do some ears and some limbs. So the ears, super simple, just steady pressure, making little spheres on top of the head, but kind of at an angle, I think is cute. You can play around with the ear spacing and see what looks cutest to you. And I kind of do this little flicking, twirling motion at the end to hopefully smooth them out a little bit. If it's not perfect, that's okay, because when it comes down to it, they're still cute, and they're food, and they're meant to be eaten. But the more you practice it, the more often you'll get your... So then we'll do some little legs. And for the legs, I stick the piping tip directly into the body meringue. I start with kind of a firm pressure and then ease off to taper it. and do that still kind of swirl motion towards the end of the leg to get it smoother. And that, when I'm doing that swirling motion, I've completely stopped applying pressure. That is just kind of shaping it with, I don't know what you'd call that, maybe the surface tension or contact with the bag, I don't know. And I like to put, because I feel like that makes them look like cute teddy bears sitting down. It's kind of maybe floppy a little bit. You could also make their legs straight out if you thought that was cute. And last, we'll do some arms. So I like to start right at the base of where the head meets the body, I guess the neck. And it's really gentle pressure at first, and then I increase just a little bit to make it thicker towards the hands. And I feel like by starting by that little neck crease there, it just looks a little less stuck on. And then you can always kind of go back with your piping tip and smooth it. And you could make their arms do all sorts of fun little poses. You could probably figure out a way to put their arms up. You could kind of pipe their arms down like they're touching the ground. I like to just do the same thing over and over again, mostly to create a consistent product, and partly just to practice those repetitions to hopefully just get better and better at piping those shapes over time. So you can also, if it's more comfortable, start kind of above the leg with firm pressure, then ease off and taper to that neckline. Sometimes that feels a little bit better. I find I go back and forth depending on how far away the meringues are from me, what place on the sheet they are. So just something to experiment with. Now this is the same black I used for the eyes of the brown bear, and it's actually more black dye than the body of the black bears. So this is actually a truer black, whereas the black bear bodies are more of a gray. And I did that just for maybe a little bit of contrast. Both of these are going to darken over time and maybe after baking. So there may not be that much contrast, but at least there will be a textural difference where the eyes are raised away from the body. So we'll see how it goes. The eyes are just simple dots. I try to put them a little bit above the nose. The nose is another little dot. And I don't usually put it right in the very center of the muzzle. I kind of like to put it just a little bit on the higher side. And that might be a personal preference. Playing with the eye distance is something that can be really fun too, just depending on what you find cute. So let's spin them around and do the tails. Pretty similar to the eyes. It's just going to be a little spear. So steady pressure and then a bit of a swirling motion to smooth it out a bit. You do have to be careful here that your piping bag doesn't smack into the one behind it. And you can avoid that by piping them a little bit further apart. I like to maximize the number I get per sheet, so I don't leave a ton of room. But it certainly makes it easier when I do. So let's do another row of bears. Brown bears, they're all bears. So start with the little blob of the body, add a little blob on top, and as long as your meringue is whipped stiff enough, it should hold its shape and not melt down. If you're finding that they start to kind of squish, it's most likely that your meringue wasn't whipped long enough or that it's starting to break down. So even if you've whipped them to stiff peaks, it can still break down if you take long enough to work with it. Have you ever tried polar bears? Yes, polar bears are one of my favorites too. I usually do them in the winter, and I like to pair them in sets with penguins and seals and walruses, things like that. Maybe even foxes. And I think it's super cute to give them little cold weather hats. What do you call those? Beanies or something? Or little holiday hats with pom-poms. And scarves. You can kind of pipe a little scarf shape around their neck, and it's super cute. And I've even tried making little mug hugger polar bears, and it didn't go super well. I'm still playing with that. Honestly think maybe marshmallows is the ticket for that. But I try to pipe them on the edge of a mug, or in this case a silicone baking cup. Yeah, they should. I think they should be on my Instagram. I'm trying to get everything up here on YouTube, so that's one I may not have yet, but so it'd probably be on Instagram or TikTok. And this year I really wanted to do marshmallow polar bears on like a marshmallow iceberg. I thought that'd be really cute. I never did get around to it, but at some point I think that would be really cute. I've also made bears that are laying down on their backs before. Kind of like those little mochi, squishy cats that you see, that they're laying on their back and their eyes are closed and they've got like little squishy bellies. And that was really fun. Especially if you make like little things for them to float on or lay on. So one year when I did Camping Critters, I made a few bears that were laying on their back so that I could put them on little meringue sleeping bags. And that was really cute. So you had some bears that were sitting and some that were sleeping. And another time I made pizza shaped meringues. So there's these wedges of pizza. I made clouds and I made donuts. And then I floated all sorts of different animals, like the sleeping bears and cats and farm animals, on top of the clouds and the pizza and the donuts, kind of like pool floaties, and then floated them in coffee, and that was one of my favorite projects. I might do that again this year. I think that's really cute in the summertime when people are wanting to get in the pool. Some of these bears get kind of tilty, like these guys are all starting to lean this way. Probably because I'm putting them farther away from me, so if you want to avoid that, you can kind of shift the sheet, keep it more in front of you. I don't mind it. I think they're still cute, so not a problem to me. And I try to make the mouths like not a perfect circle shape, maybe a little bit more of an oval. And you could absolutely just do a circle shape. That's just my preference. That's what I think is so fun about some of these meringue techniques, is you can just learn them from other people and apply them in just a slightly different way, and you can get a very different look. I always think that's the best way to learn, is try imitating someone else's design and then just tweaking it a little bit, seeing how you can push and adapt the techniques. And that's how you kind of get your own style and make your own creations. There we go. And now I'm going to give them some more tails. You can see they're about the same distance away from the black bears, so I'm going to have to be careful again not to take off part of the black bear's face. Here we go. And on to another row of black bears. Black bears are pretty popular on on like souvenirs and merchandising gift shops and souvenir shops in Montana. A lot of bears in Montana. And I like that. I really like black bears. I think they are super cute. They're just a little bit smaller than a lot of other kinds of bears. We have black bears here. We have grizzlies here. I don't see them in town usually. Although, years after I graduated high school, I saw a video of a bear, little black bear, I think it was younger, maybe not a baby, but not an adult, walking down the halls of my high school, which was really surreal. So I guess it had wandered in through a propped open door or something like that. I was just strolling around. Thank you. Glad you like the bears. I like making the bears. I think the weirdest thing about the bear walking around my old high school was that this high school was not like in a wooded area or anything. It was on one of the main streets, surrounded by busy streets. Lots of people around. But it must have wandered in kind of while classes were in session and there weren't a lot of people to scare them. But normally bears stay pretty far away from people. What I do see all the time in town now, it's a different town, but I see it in a lot of Montana towns, are deer. And they're almost to the point where they're pests. You'll see whole herds of them in people's yards. Across the street when it's, rush hour, when all the schools are getting out, letting kids out, getting in the way. They're beautiful, but they're kind of a problem sometimes. Eat people's flowers. Alright, let's give these guys some little muzzles. Another thing that's really popular in Montana and that maybe we're known for are huckleberries. When you get to a certain elevation, they grow there. I think they can be really hard to cultivate, so a lot of people just forage them. And I think they're going for $20 a pound maybe at the farmer's market right now, so people will pay a lot. And if you've ever harvested huckleberries, which I haven't, but my dad has, he's told me about it. It takes a long time to harvest those. Tiny berries and just kind of tricky. So, and I've picked blackberries before, maybe raspberries, so I can kind of imagine huckleberries are even smaller. But since Montana is known for black bears and huckleberries, one year I made a video with little black bear meringues on top of a huckleberry flavored Italian soda. And that was really fun. And I had this cute little glass bear mug that was perfect for it. And sadly I broke it. So maybe someday I'll get a replacement, but I was glad I got that video in before it did break. And then we'll alternate back to brown bears. And when you're piping the bodies, you actually don't have to pause and like take the tip away fully. If you kind of, might be kind of hard to see at this angle, but you can pipe it. And then I'm just letting off pressure and then piping the second sphere. So either way is fine. It just kind of depends on what you want to do. The way where you just ease off pressure and pipe another sphere might give you a bit more of a smoother transition. But the fact is it's probably going to sink down a little bit during baking anyways. These don't contract or expand like cookies would, but gravity will still affect them. And so you still don't want to pipe them too close together, because even though they don't melt down and expand like cookies with flour and butter, the gravity can make them lean towards each other, and then you can have two that are sticking together, which you may not want. Although sometimes it is fun to make a design where two little animals are snuggling each other, so you know what, maybe sometimes you do. But cooked meringue is pretty brittle, so it would be hard to separate attached meringues after the fact, so just something to be mindful of. Scoot this a little bit, there we go. I'll give them some legs. Perfect. And sometimes I find the legs come off from touching the mat, so this guy's leg is kind of hovering over here. And that's okay. They can touch the ground completely, or they can just be kind of, maybe they're doing like a little leg raise exercise, or doing some bear yoga. Which, when I think about it, doing little creatures in yoga poses would be kind of fun. Maybe kind of tricky, because some of those defy gravity, and meringue does not do so well with gravity. But if you simplified them enough, I think they could do some fun little poses. And lately I've been thinking of different ways I could use meringue, like kind of gluing some pretzels together with meringue and baking them to make a little raft. I think that would be really cute, because the little pretzel sticks would look like logs. Could maybe make a log cabin like that too. Pretzel and meringue work really well together, and they taste really good together too. And to kind of go with my woodland animal, camping, outdoorsy vibe for this market, I'm making chiffon cake sandwiches. So they are, 2 pieces of cake with whipped cream and a jam in the middle, cut in triangles to look like sandwiches and packaged in little sandwich containers. I thought the theme would be cool to do triple berry, because when I think of camping, when I think of the outdoors, when I think of things like bears, I think of berries and berry picking. When I think of this time of year, I think of berries. They're usually ripe. So it'll be strawberry, blueberry, and raspberry jam. Do kind of a whipped frosting. And the chiffon cake will be made with oat flour instead of cake flour, as I traditionally do, because it adds a little bit of nuttiness without adding nuts to the cake. So maybe a little bit more rustic taste, more complex, and I think that would go really nice with the berries. Plus, it makes it gluten-free. If you use certified gluten-free oat flour, that is, which I do. And a lot of my customers come to my booth who can't have gluten. I still always caution people that my kitchen's not gluten-free. For those with celiac and really extreme sensitivities, might not be safe for them. As much as I put an effort into cleaning and sanitizing and being really careful not to cross-contaminate, it always is a risk because I cook with flour for myself. But that said, a lot of people come and they maybe don't have celiac, they maybe don't have an extreme sensitivity, they just can't ingest it, gluten. And macarons are naturally gluten-free. I try to keep all the fillings gluten-free. Meringues, they're naturally gluten-free. I try not to add anything that might contain gluten because it makes it a little safer for those people to eat and enjoy. So sometimes I like to do that with cake too. I have quite a few family members who are sensitive to gluten, so not crazy reactions to being exposed to it, but they can't eat it, or it will be a bad time. And the 1-to-1 substitute flours are kind of nice, but I don't always like to use them. The rice flour in them makes them a little gummy sometimes. So whenever I have the choice, I try to find ways that they didn't start with flour in the first place, if that makes sense. So like macarons, like meringues. Gluten-free, because heck, they're not supposed to have flour anyway. The downside to meringues, though, is there's a fair amount of people who are allergic to eggs, and there's not a very affordable way to make meringue without eggs. Make it with aquafaba, that water that's in chickpea cans. But I think that would be pretty expensive, and I've actually never tried it. I've always wanted to, but I bet it's a little bit more challenging. Eggs are just so magical. They're structurally strong, or can be made strong. Give these guys some little arms. For this black meringue, it's actually more of a gray meringue, just very dark gray. I used Chef Master, I think it's coal black or charcoal black, but I actually split the meringue into 2 batches after coloring it brown. So it's got this brown base in there, and then I colored this half of the batch with the black gel food coloring. But I also added a little bit of Buttercup Yellow, I think is the Wilton gel food coloring color name, because the Chef Master Black and maybe other black gel food colorings has kind of a purple base, and I didn't want these to turn at all purple on me. So to cancel out those purple undertones, I just add a little bit of yellow to balance it out. Might have been fine since I was already coloring brown meringue black, but just in case. I wanted black bears, not purple bears. Although I'm sure purple bears would be very cute too. Do some little Care Bears, you know? Bet you could have them hold those little Lucky Charm marshmallows, and that would kind of give off Care Bear vibes. And actually, it would be pretty cute to do a variety of bears in different colors and different flavors. So all my character meringues, or animal meringues, I just make them vanilla because it's versatile. I don't have to think too much about like, okay, does this coloring have, or this flavoring have a color to it? My vanilla extract's brown, but after it's all whipped up in the meringue still looks white, so it's just a really nice starting point. Whereas some of my food colorings, I think they must add dyes to it because some of them are kind of red or blue. Or maybe that's just the nature of, you know, some of the berry flavorings. You're going to get that berry color in there maybe. But it would be cool to do, oh, I just realized I used the wrong color muzzle for these guys, so they might be sample quality. Still cute, but they were supposed to have brown muzzles. Whoopsie. They're just different. They're trendsetters. Okay? But it would be cute to do like pink bears and they're strawberry or raspberry flavor, and blue bears are blueberry flavored, and I don't know what green bears would be. Maybe matcha or something. I'd have to figure that out. Alright, so I'm going to go put these guys in the food dehydrator and grab another tray. And I ended with black bears, so I'll start up again with brown bears. Ooh, that's blurry. You can probably see this a little better. These little bears, I think I've been piping their ears a little bit taller on their head, which makes them look a little bit perkier, a little bit more awake. So one of those features that's fun to play with to get slightly different effects. And I'm just gonna leave these ones as is, but I also really love making bear meringues where they're holding something with their little hands. So for Valentine's Day, I like to either keep them this size and pipe little hearts on their chest and then wrap the arms around the hearts. Or I like to make even bigger meringues and stick a conversation heart on their chests and pipe their hands like that around the candy heart. Just makes it super cute. And that's fun with any of these upright animal designs, giving them something to hold on to. Like otters, I found these really cute seashell sprinkles online, I think. I can't remember if I got them on Etsy or somewhere else, but they came in purple and pink and blue. And I got to put those on some otter meringues and have them hold those, kind of like how they hold, is it oysters on their belly to crack them open? And then of course recently I did some mama and baby otter marshmallows where the mom was holding a little baby otter on her belly. So all sorts of fun things you can do with meringue. Alright, give them some little muzzles. And pandas, I can't remember how I made pandas, but I did do pandas one time. And I think the part I was struggling with is sometimes it's hard to do things like the panda's eye patches, because as you can see, if you pipe something onto the surface, usually it has some volume, it comes out. And I wanted the patches to just look flush with the skin, and I haven't quite figured out the best way to do that yet. Because you can under whip your meringue, and it'll spread a lot easier, but then it might also bleed after or during baking. So I think I probably did end up trying to pipe really, really thin amount to make their little eye patches. I'll have to go back. I swear I made a video of that, but I don't know if I ever posted it. But the rest was not too bad. You would pipe a white body and a white head, and then maybe do some black little ears, black limbs, and I think that would make it look enough like a panda without having to do anything too complex. Alright, look at this guy. His eye is just a little bit buggy there. Oh my goodness. Let's not throw our baking sheet. Okay, and then we'll do some more black bears. Oh wait, I didn't give them tails. Let's give them tails. And this back row is always my favorite for adding tails because there's nothing behind them. So I can put the piping bag wherever I want and I have a good amount of control. So they usually have the best looking tails, the guys in the back. All right, now we'll do black bears. How long have you been doing this? These are adorable. Well, thank you. I think I've been doing this. This is probably the 4th year now, so 3 years going on 4. June. Or at least, am I calculating that right? This is my 4th year at the farmer's market. So like, yeah, so like 3 solid years entering into the 4th year. And I first learned about these from Cooking with Amy on, I think I saw her on Instagram first and then started following her on TikTok and YouTube and all those places. And I made some little piggy ones. And it's like my first TikTok video that I ever posted about meringues were the piggies. And I've gotten a lot better since then. They were not that cute. But they were cute enough that my coworkers really liked them, and when I was still working in the office. So I brought them in and people went crazy for them. And I had one coworker who said, "Could I like buy a set for you? I want to bring him to my grandson." And I was just doing it for fun at that point. I was gearing up for farmers markets, but to sell macarons. And once she told me she'd like to buy them, I was like, oh, we might have something here. So I made her a set that was chickens, pigs, and cows. And her grandson absolutely loved the pigs. Like, he couldn't even eat them. They were too cute for him. And so at that point, I was like, well, shoot, this is all I really want to do right now. And that's how it goes. Usually I learn something new or see something that I want to learn, and I'm obsessed with it, and I have to do it. And I have to do it till I'm happy with it. Which is kind of how macarons happen, too. That's a different story. But I made some farm animal ones. I think I made some cat ones. And I also made some, I think Easter that year must have been around that time. And that's how I knew maybe I had something that people wanted to buy, was I listed them on a Facebook group for my area. And I got a lot of engagement. It was surprising. And I didn't have that many tubs of meringues. And then I had all these people asking if they could order some for Easter. And I was like, oh my gosh, I could make more. So when I brought meringues and macarons to that first farmer's market, I had no idea how much to make. So I sold out in the first hour, which was really encouraging, but also like, okay, I'm just going to sit here for another 3 or 4 hours just, talking about the product when people come up, but I have nothing to give them. So the next time I tripled my inventory, and meringues have been on the menu ever since. And they continue to be one of the best-selling items. So at one point I thought, could I just do meringues? I just want to do meringues. That sounds fun. But people love the macarons, so I feel like I'm not going to stop doing those. I don't want to take those away. And honestly, it's about 50-50. Like, profit-wise, I get about half my profit from meringues and half of it from macarons. So now I just do both. And I think practice is probably just the biggest factor in getting better at these guys, as with anything. Kind of an intentional practice where you know what result you want and then you keep doing the repetitions. And selling them at farmers market, let me tell you, that was a quick way to get quick soon. Real efficient. Because trying to keep up with that demand the first year there were a lot of mistakes and a lot of stress. Some failed batches where I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have anything to sell, and late nights remaking them. So it was kind of my crash course in meringues. And all sorts of things went wrong that first year. Like, we had a really rainy summer, so the humidity in my apartment made a lot of the meringue sticky after baking. So I had to troubleshoot that. And it was to the point where I'm like, oh shoot, should I try marshmallows instead? Because I don't know if I'm going to be able to sell meringues. But there's still a demand for these little guys. But thankfully I invested in a, what are those called? A dehumidifier for my apartment. And that was a huge help. Like, I had switched, I was trying to learn how to do Swiss meringue and it wasn't going that well. So I switched over to Italian meringue to kind of help with the humidity issue, which it does make a sturdier meringue, but it didn't necessarily solve the humidity issue. So the dehumidifier was the biggest solution, just controlling the humidity in my apartment. And I haven't had to use it a lot. Really not at all this year. But I have it, just in case. So I learned all sorts of tricks, like if you put them in the freezer, just when there's like a hint of them starting to get sticky, you might be able to save them because the freezer might dry them out a little bit. And the trick with the freezer is you want to put them in an airtight container, and then when you go to thaw them, you leave the container closed at room temperature or on the counter until they reach room temperature, because it allows the condensation on the outside to evaporate and not affect the meringue. So it's not a perfect solution. I think there's a point of no return, but if they're just a little sticky, it's something that can help a lot. And it's a good way to store them if you do live somewhere humid, if you need to store them a little bit longer term. I've found that if I package them in their final deli container packaging, those suckers close so tight, at least the ones I get, that they'll last months unopened. And they'll stay super dry and crisp, which is amazing. But if it's kind of your typical food storage containers that are airtight but not like super tight, long term I would put those in the freezer. I don't have that problem because I make these for production, and it's a challenge to even keep up to make enough for the market week to week. So I don't really have to worry about shelf life as much because they get packaged within probably two or 3 days, because I make them in sets of making them in their deli containers, and then at that point storage is just, I don't have to think about it, they just keep. And then they sell fast enough that I don't know if I'm even sure of how long their shelf life can be. I know I've kept them for up to 3 months before. So that's my personal experience with it, but my mom and my grandma will keep them for, like, they have some that are a year old that are still dry and crisp. So it might just kind of depend on the humidity in your home, how often you're opening them, all that good stuff. Desiccant packets can help too. I have some reusable ones I throw in my food storage containers. And then they change color when they've absorbed a bunch of moisture, so then you know to put them in the oven, and then they have instructions on how to dry them out again. And then you can keep using them, which is really cool. Because I would think if you were using disposable ones, those costs could add up quite a bit. And you could even put some of those desiccant packets in the deli containers for sale, but I have not found it necessary for mine. Maybe in more humid states it'd be a good idea, but Montana's so dry year round that I haven't found I needed that. little guys some tails. All right, some more black bears. Getting towards the end of this pastry bag, so I'll probably switch tips real quick here. I get them all ready with coupling attachments, and then I really just switch between one tip per color. I just find that an efficient way to do it. Slightly less dishes to wash because you're using the same piping tip. And I can tell this meringue looks a little bit softer, like maybe it is just starting to break down a little bit, which is fine, but it's something to be aware of maybe make the bases just a little bit thicker so that the heads don't start to tilt to one side, if that's something you're worried about. And the way I can tell is it just is looking a little bit wet and shiny, and then it feels kind of softer than it did earlier on. But it's still perfectly workable, and sometimes it's kind of nice when it's that smooth and soft because you get, well, smoother shapes. But the downside to underworked meringue is the colors will bleed a little bit more. And I think some weird textural stuff can happen sometimes. Like I've noticed recently some of mine in the food dehydrator have gotten a little bit of a bumpy texture. I don't quite know what that's about. How much do I spend on my supplies? Honestly, probably too much. Because I make every excuse to buy more cool tools for the business. But you can keep the costs pretty low. So of course, I don't know off the top of my head. I have spreadsheets of all the expenses every month written down, and that's kind of how I choose to track it. But I can kind of list some of the bare essentials, and I'll try to remember the prices that go along with it so you guys can have an idea. So, of course, there's the eggs, and I use fresh eggs, which can be kind of expensive, but I feel that you get a better product that way. Pasteurized egg whites will work just fine. It's just, there's a trade-off either way. And then to maximize how much I get out of those eggs, I save the yolks and use them for things like aioli or lemon curd or French buttercream. So there's the eggs, there's sugar, which is pretty cheap, granulated sugar, vanilla extract, little goes a long way, cream of tartar, and then for Italian meringue, to me, some of the must-haves are a nice, like, maybe 1.5 quart saucepan, and I like stainless steel, mostly because I can clip a candy thermometer without having to worry about the damaging the surface of like a nonstick pan. So a candy thermometer, which can be anywhere between, I don't know, like $8 and $15. And I like to get the analog ones because I've found they're typically more reliable. I've had some digital ones mess up on me, but you'll just want to make sure you have a couple options if you're not confident in the reading. So a pan, a candy thermometer. I really recommend a stand mixer if you're going to be making meringues a lot, especially Italian meringue. Not required though. There's something called a stabilizer that I think is maybe 20-25 bucks, that if you have a electric hand mixer and some mixing bowls, you can pour the syrup, and then the stabilizer, which is just this silicone thing that you rest the bowl in so it doesn't move, then you can do it that way. But a stand mixer could be $300 or more dollars, so there's that. So the entry fee is maybe more expensive than continuing it. And then you can use just your normal oven with a cookie sheet, and parchment paper works really well, or you can get silicone baking mats. So kind of depends. There's the one-time fee of the silicone baking mats, which a lot of times I find them in sets for two for maybe around $20. Or there's parchment paper, which is cheaper entry level, but if you keep paying the price, then that's another factor. So if you already have things like baking pans and silicone baking mats and stand mixers or hand mixers, you're most of the way there, and it's mostly the cost of ingredients. But then the last thing for me that has become non-negotiable are these piping bags. These are reusable piping bags. Or not reusable, I'm sorry, disposable. I started with reusable, and that's a good way to save some money, but not a good way to save time. So I think a 500 pack of these is maybe $15. Either 500 or 200 pack, I can't remember. So I buy a bunch at one time. So I would say it's a little more expensive than some baking, like say just making cookies. You pretty much just need a bowl and something to stir for a lot of those. But if you already have a lot of the baking gear, it's pretty affordable to get into. So that's a very long-winded answer. I'm sorry, but per batch, I wonder how much I spend, because I think if I really calculate it down, like when I figure just supplies, ingredients and supplies that I have, so like the eggs and the sugar, the vanilla extract, the cream of tartar, the piping bags, I think just materials are maybe like $4 per batch. And then of course I sell a 10-piece tub for $10, so it's about $1 per meringue. So huge profit margin there. So it could take a little bit of money if you don't have any of the supplies to get into it, but I wouldn't say probably more than a few hundred, which isn't nothing, but it's a much lower startup cost than a lot of other things. And then if you get really into it like me and you just want cool tools, you end up buying a food dehydrator specifically for your meringues, and more silicone baking mats for the food dehydrator. And that might have been maybe $200 or $300 for the food dehydrator. Totally not a necessary cost. You can use your oven with absolutely no problem. But it just became a workflow efficiency thing for me. So in a year for the full baking business, I think maybe I spend up to $6,000 on all my supplies, equipments, and fees, which includes like farmers market fees. Something that I write off on my taxes is like the Adobe Creative Suite, because I use that a lot for marketing with Photoshop and Illustrator, and for video editing with Premiere Pro. So I probably spend more than some other bakers just because I give myself more expenses rather than using free options like Canva. But some of those costs are still a little bit, maybe almost startup cost, because as I branch into other things, I might get better equipment. And like the first year was maybe more than that because I got a couple of freezers, the stand mixer, things like that. But there are always less expensive ways to get into these baking projects, especially if you're not doing them every day. I find that it's worth it to upgrade and make your process more efficient, more enjoyable, or easier on your body if you're doing them day in and day out like I am. But if you're just doing them as a hobby, it's like, don't go out and buy a food dehydrator, you know, if you're never going to use a food dehydrator. Work your way up to those things. You don't even have to get piping bags like this. You can use a Ziploc bag and then just snip the tip of the corner. You don't even need metal piping tips. You can just cut them into your desired shape. I don't know how to do that very well, but there are tutorials out there. But meringues are mostly expensive on your time. As you can see, we're like a little over an hour in and I've made almost 2 sheets. So really what the cost to make them is fairly low. It's just the amount of time you spend is high, and if you're charging for your time, that's going to raise the price. And the price of eggs going up did impact my sales margins a little bit. But still, the most expensive thing was always time. So I decided not to raise my prices when the price of eggs went up, knowing that this has happened before. The chickens get sick and then it takes a while to build the chicken population back up. And so I had a feeling they would go back down again, and I didn't want to pass the cost along to my customers. And sure enough, it's down now, and I feel like that is just better for your customer relationships. But man, I use eggs for everything. You use the egg whites for meringues, for macarons, for marshmallows, and I've gotten really into chiffon cakes, so you actually use the whole eggs for those. You just do it in 2 steps, whipping the egg whites. But pretty much everything I do has some kind of meringue base, which is really weird. And then I eat eggs. That's a big thing for me. Every morning I like to have, this might sound weird, but like a savory oatmeal and then scrambled eggs. Or eggs and toast. Sometimes I'll work eggs into dinner somehow. I love eggs. So it was very sad when they were like $8 to $10 for 18. Oh, I was going to do the ears first. Let's do the ears first. Oh yeah, this meringue is getting soft. Doesn't look like it's a problem right now. And part of the reason the black might be breaking down faster than the brown meringue is that I had to add so much more gel food coloring to get that dark gray. And the reason you use gel food coloring is so you don't thin out the meringue and change the consistency too much. But I still think you're adding something that's not meringue. You're mixing, which is going to deflate your meringue at least a little bit. And so all of those things combined, it makes sense that the black would break down a little bit sooner. lose some of its airiness and structure. I find every excuse to make bear meringues. Like, I've really been wanting to do a circus theme or carnival theme farmers market where I do lions and elephants, but also maybe some bears with like little hats and bow ties. And of course, they'd be bears. Of course. Because I love them. And then the cake would be maybe a circus tent or something. We'll see. I don't know. I always have these ambitious ideas, and then when it comes to week of the market, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have no time. And so I don't get to be that creative. But someday that's my goal, is to make the circus tent cake. Someday. All right, another sheet done. So I'm gonna go grab another sheet. I'll be right back. And once again, we ended with black bears, which is good. It means my rows are consistent. Sometimes I get too big or too small or get the spacing off. And then I end up with weird odd amounts that don't match on each tray. Which isn't really that bad, it's just, I'm particular. I want them all matchy-matchy. I'm not sure if I can get one more full sheet of these or if I'm gonna run out of meringue. I have one more bag left of each color. So we'll see, we'll just see how it goes. gonna behave. Always struggle with those ones back there, getting the camera to focus. Alright, give them some muzzles. And some little noses and eyes. Oh, it was a tiny eye. There we go. Sometimes if it's not quite the shape I want, I just kind of tweak it with the tip of my piping bag. See if I can make it something I like more. Something about the placement in the eyes and nose of that one I really like. And we'll give them some tails. And these ones on the end, you can kind of see these little streaky lines going through them. And I'm pretty sure that's because I didn't mix the dye in all the way. There's just little patches where maybe I didn't. And it's partly because I get worried about over mixing it. I don't want to deflate the meringue too much. Does humidity affect the meringue? Yes. Not so much when you're piping them in this stage, but after baking them, absolutely. It's a huge factor. So there's some people, oh, 1 second. A little tickle in my throat. Some people won't even make meringue on rainy days because the humidity in the air is so impactful. And to me, I've mostly noticed it on the back end. So after they're baked, if the humidity is above 45% in my kitchen, I've noticed they start getting sticky and hard to handle. They might stick to each other, stick to my fingers. And there are recipes, I don't specialize in those because it's usually so dry where I live. It's usually much under 45% humidity here. But there are Italian meringue recipes designed for high humidity environments. And I think maybe they add powdered sugar or cornstarch to help with that. But some things you can do if it's, I guess I'll give a list of things that I would do in different situations, from like low cost solutions to more expensive but really effective solutions. And so the first one would obviously be trying to find a high humidity recipe. The second one would be put them in airtight containers and freeze them as soon as you can. I live in California, so it's not usually a problem for me, but I know it's a problem in other places. Absolutely. I know some people in Taiwan and Singapore high humidity places like that, or like Florida, where it's just, you know, pulling your hair out trying to figure it out. So with my meringue recipe, I can pop them in the freezer, and that kind of helps dry them out. And it's great for long-term storage if you need them to be stored for a long time. And then the trick there is you just want to take them out of the freezer, put them on the counter, and let them come completely back to room temperature before opening the container, because the condensation can make them sticky. I'm even afraid to store meringues in the fridge because I think the humidity in there can mess with them. I know some people who have done it and it was fine, but good to keep in mind. If you're topping cakes like buttercream or cupcakes with them, the frosting moisture will absolutely soften these guys. So you'll see some color running. They probably won't dissolve too much, but they will change. And so if you're using them to decorate things like cakes, it's good to put them on right before serving so that they stay how you intended them to. Another thing that I've done that I don't usually have to do, it's mostly like short-term storage, but you can use desiccant packets to absorb some of the moisture in the containers you store them in. And then the most expensive but most effective solution I've found is getting a dehumidifier that is the right size and power for your square footage of the area you want to be dry. So for some people that's not an option, just living situation, or it's just a price point people don't have in their budget. But that's something that I invested in because that changed everything for a couple really humid summers. So I haven't used it in a while, but it was really effective. There was one, it was the first summer I was selling these, and it was a crash course in everything meringue because I had the demand and I had to keep up with it. And I was tearing my hair out because it was raining so much, and all the meringues would stick to each other, stick to me. They would lose that really nice crisp texture. And so finally I broke down and I bought a humidifier. And man, it was life-changing. So, like I said, I don't use it very often anymore. I think this apartment I live in is better insulated than my last one. So I think that helps with some of the humidity. But it's also just been drier overall. But I will never get rid of that dehumidifier because that was a lifesaver. Oops. But as far as piping them, I almost think moisture, it's weird because I think mixing the meringue and piping the meringue might actually be better in a high humidity environment because your meringue isn't going to form like a skin as quickly. And in most cases that doesn't really matter, but... And same for things like macarons. I've heard high humidity is good for macarons. Like you might get better macarons that way. But then you might also be waiting for hours and hours for a skin to form. The other thing that maybe everybody already knew this, and I just had never done candy making before, so I hadn't worked with sugar syrups a lot, but it took me forever to figure out how to do Italian meringue for just meringue or for Italian macarons. And it was because when you boil sugar syrup, the different stages are affected, or I guess the elevation you're at depends on how high you need to heat the sugar syrup. So when I was first starting out, I kept burning my sugar syrup, and part of it was because my thermometer was off, but another part of it was because I lived at 4,000 feet in elevation, and you're supposed to subtract 2 degrees off for every 1,000 feet in elevation above sea level. So here I was already overcooking it because the meringue was reading lower, and then I was cooking it too high of a target temperature anyways. So I was trying to heat it to 240 degrees Fahrenheit when I should have been trying to heat it to about 132. So, fun fact, if you've never really done a lot of sugar syrup or candy making, something to keep in mind for meringues and macarons if they're not turning out. And if you've tried everything else. We'll see what it's like at the farmer's market this week. It's been really nice out lately. Nice and clear and sunny and kind of warm. Not too warm. Kind of how I like it. But the one day it's supposed to rain this week, I think, is during the farmer's market. So I may not sample meringues because they will get sticky and people will get messy. And it's just not the consistency I want people to experience for meringues if they're trying it for the first time. So we'll see. If it's raining, no meringue samples this weekend. If it's not, out they come. This part always takes me a little bit more focus just because those little guys behind them affect the angle of how I pipe those tails on. Sometimes I pipe the eyes and the nose a little bit smaller than I want them when the meringue is this soft because it'll kind of spread. I always find that balance a little bit tricky to reserve some of the meringue before it's whipped to the consistency you want for the bodies. Getting it the right consistency for those little details to paint on can be kind of tricky. Always seems to work out, but just kind of have to adapt each time. gonna do the tails. Then I'll move on to the faces. There we go. There we go. Get back to our brown bears. And now the brown meringue is starting to get a little softer too. So it's maybe a good thing we're getting towards the end of the batch, because it's getting to that point where it's just a little trickier to work with. Stacking little meringue blobs on top of each other, they want to lean over a little bit more at this point. I might actually get a little bit of a fourth sheet out of this meringue. Kind of cool. Maybe a row of brown bears and a row of black bears after this sheet. We'll just see. And whenever I make this set of woodland animals, little camping animals, I always like to make the bears and then like tomorrow the foxes and deer first, all the animals, because I usually plan the set with a brown bear, a black bear, 2 deer, 2 foxes, 3 trees, and then 1 campfire. So if I know how many bears I have, if I know how many deer and foxes I have, I can kind of figure before I start the campfires and the trees how many I'll need and portion the meringue out as best I can to hit those numbers. So I'd have more green meringue than brown and orange for the flames. And if I don't quite get it right, well, I can have some sets that are just one design or another, and sometimes that's exactly what people want. Sometimes people just want bears or just want foxes. And this time I'll probably end up, I have to remember, striping the bags for the little flames for the campfires, kind of orange and red and yellow. I feel like that'll make them look even more like flames. I think in the past I just made them a pretty aggressive orange, which was fine. I think that looked cute. But it's fun to experiment with things when you've done something several times before. So I hope I remember to do that. gonna have to figure out what kind of little woodsy decorations I'm gonna bring to the market next, or this Saturday too. I have some little candles that are made out of, like, I don't know, they look kind of like little stumps, and then the candles sit in there. And then have a serving platter type thing, or a display thing that's like a little cross section of a log, so that'll be cute. My mom got me this little wooden camper van thing that's like, I think it's holds like either three candles or 3 little plants or something. I don't know if I'm gonna get another bear, maybe one more bear. It's a tiny bear, little baby bear. That's it for the black meringue. But I thought I could put my little sample spoons in that. Be kind of cute, so we'll see. I've got some options. I don't like to decorate too much at the markets because it makes tear down take longer if I pack more. And we already pack the car pretty full every weekend with product and with the tent. But a few little camping themed decorations would be really cute. Really easy way would be if I had time to make signage that kind of looked like national park or campground signage. I started doing it at one point and I just ran out of time, so probably not going to happen this week, but it could be really cute for a future market. Since I've gone full-time baking, self-employed, I've been able to do so many more bakes that I've been wanting to do for years because I have the time and energy to do it. So that's been really fun. Like little chiffon cake sandwiches and cookie shortbread fries. Shortbread cookie fries. That's the way to say it. Which I barely had enough time last year when I was still working part-time and then doing farmers markets to get my meringues and macarons done. It's hard to do much else extra on top of that, and part of that was just being so tired. So now I found I have a lot more time and energy to add more things to my menu, which is great. Let's see, put these little faces. I was hoping I'd have more time this season to make videos, so the live stream is kind of my compromise, where I can still make content, but I also want to make some shorter, like, summary videos that are a little bit more instructional, a little bit more polished, and I haven't really had the time to really focus on that, so it's another thing I'm working towards, goals for the future. And I'm going to see if I can fit this last row of brown bears here. I think they'll just fit. It'll be a little crowded. This would be a cute gift with matching paper napkins or something. That would be really cute. That's something I always thought would be fun, is doing kind of custom napkins and like disposable party serveware, like the disposable plates, like you said, napkins, cups. Just have like a whole party theme. That's something else I'd like to dabble in, is kind of learning how to create some of that stuff, or get it created for me. Listed on Etsy or something. Be cool if there's like print on demand for that. Maybe there is. Because then you could list the patterns and then other people could print them out. Or order them from a print on demand place maybe. I'm not sure how that would work, but there's got to be a way. There's just so much cool tech out there. So many cool ways to get custom stuff made that there's a way. Alright, this is going to be a little tight. Getting those little tails. You guys probably can't see that super well. I'm kind of in between black bears there. Alright, I'll finish off the faces. So I'll be wrapping this up pretty soon. I'm going to put all the trays in the food dehydrator and bake them for 165 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 hours. I once decorated little sugar cubes with little bees, flowers, Christmas themes. Super cute, but I just don't have ambition. It's another idea for people out there. That is such a cute idea. I love the idea of decorated sugar cubes. That would just make a tea party even more special and magical. I bet they were gorgeous. But I also feel, yeah, that sometimes you have these really great ideas and then you're like, I'm kind of tired. Or I've got a lot going on. I've had a lot of ideas like that where it's really fun to imagine and then I'm like, no. I feel like sugar cubes would take a lot of patience, but it would just be so elegant once you finished them up. All right, and I think that is it. So thanks everybody for joining me today. If you want to watch me make more meringues tomorrow, I'll be making foxes and deer, and I think they'll be male deer with antlers. And then on Thursday, I'll be making some campfires and some trees to go with them. So I'm going to go bake these and clean everything up, and I will hopefully see you guys tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks again.